The future tense most often indicates that an action or an event will happen sometime in the future. This is called a predictive or prophetic future. Now in this verse 19, Jesus makes this statement, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And we find out later on in this passage that this statement here actually refers to his resurrection, an event that has yet to happen. And keep in mind that in Greek, this tense here does not comment on the process of the event, but just looks at it as a whole. Now I want to draw your attention to one thing in the reverse interlinear pane. You'll see that these two words here, I and will, are supplied for the translation of this Greek verb, egero, which is in the future tense. The ESV, nor any other Bible translation, is not trying to add words to the text. This just indicates how English and Greek don't match up one to one. In English, we need to supply an auxiliary verb here. In this case, it's will, in order to create or in order to form our future tense. In Greek, you don't need to do that. That's all done through the formation of the word itself. Now, it's important that when you come across a future tense that's being used in a prophetic fashion, that you look at how the hearers in the original context understood this statement. And you can see that the Jews respond to his statement, taking his words very literally, referring to the physical temple in Jerusalem. They say, "It has taken us 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" Now, fortunately, we have John's commentary here provided for us that helps us understand Jesus' words, even though the original hearers may have not. And John says this, "But he was speaking about the temple of his body." And then verse 22, "When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken." It's important to keep in mind that labels like predicative or prophetic are just that. They're labels. What's important to understand is the meaning tied to the labels, and to see how important context is for the understanding of how a tense is working in a given verse or passage. And in Revelation 17:14, we have another example of the future tense used with a predictive or prophetic sense. The future tense here indicates that these two actions, make war and will conquer, will happen sometime in the future from the perspective of the writer or speaker. And as I pointed out below in the reverse interlinear pane, you can see that the English words here are supplied, that auxiliary verb we looked at before, will, and again over here, in order to form the future tense in English. Now, if we were to look at the text comparison tool, you wouldn't see a lot of disagreement among translations as to how they translate the future in this verse. But that doesn't mean that you should overlook the action that you find expressed in the future tense. As I mentioned in the previous illustration, you want to consider what this kind of statement would have meant to the original readers. Here we have a statement, "They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them." Now, if you look at the historical context of this letter, you'd find that Revelation was most likely written to a community of Christians that were struggling under the rule of the Roman Emperor. For he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and those with him are called chosen and faithful. The future indicative may be also used to express a general truth. This is called a proverbial or gnomic future. And that's just the case here in Luke chapter 12, verse 32. "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." And this use of the future tense here in this verse doesn't have to do with pointing to a specific point in time in the future or to an event that has yet to happen. Rather, it's expressing a general truth. We have these sorts of phrases in English. Think of the saying, "Boys will be boys." In that instance, the verb will be isn't pointing to a specific time in the future. It's just expressing a general truth. Let's take a look at another illustration. Romans 5:7 reads, "For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die." And in this verse, we have the Greek future tense, indicating not an event that is yet to happen, but a general truth that would be held by virtually everyone. Typically, Greek uses the imperative mood to express a command. But Greek can also use the future indicative second person to express a command. This is called an imperative future. In Matthew 4:10, the Greek future tense underlying these two English verbs expresses command. If we were to read this verse apart from the context and apply only a basic understanding of the future tense, we may think that Jesus is talking about an event that will happen someday in the future, that someday Satan will worship the Lord and serve him. But instead, the future tense is expressing a command. This happens most often with Old Testament quotations. In general, the translation of a future tense used with an imperative sense varies more than it does with the predictive or gnomic future. Let's take a look in the text comparison. And you can see that the ESV, as well as the NASB, the KJV, and the NKJV supply the verb shall to translate this use of the future tense. But you notice that the NRSV and the NIV drop the you shall part, making the force of the imperative a little bit more explicit. Romans 13:9 has a series of Greek future tense verbs in the second person which express command. Now in this instance, or in this verse, the command is negative, as you can see the adverb here, not, supplied in front of each use of the future tense. And in keeping with this usage of the future, this is a quote from the Old Testament, Exodus 20:13 through 17, and Deuteronomy 5:17 through 21. And as with the previous example, there's variation as to how the idea of the imperative is expressed. Let's take a look at the text comparison. Now the majority of the translations, like the ESV and the NRSV, NASB as well as King James, the New King James, all supply you shall. Now this isn't wrong, it's just to point out the differences in how the idea of the imperative is expressed. Notice that the NIV and the NLT drop the you shall and simply have do not, or in the instance of the New Living Translation, they have you must not, and each one brings out the sense of the imperative a bit more. The future tense as imperative is an important category for study, and it's especially important when we're putting together a search that's based on morphology or a visual filter that's based on morphology. So if we wanted to find all the commands or imperatives in a given book or passage, we'd want to make sure that we have the @ symbol typed in, and we select verb and select imperative. And since we know now that the future tense can express imperative when it's in the second person, we're going to want to add that in as well. And we do that by typing and then once again, our verb and future and second person. And run this search. And here you can see first on the list of our results is Matthew 4:10, that first example we looked at.